I'm Andy Thackray. I'm the Objects Conservator here at Royal Pavilion and Museums. My role within the Saloon restoration project has been the conservation work on the movable furniture and the decorative arts objects. So the Saloon furniture are royal loans from the Royal Collection. They're original pieces of furniture from the Saloon. The decorative arts objects are collections that have been brought into the Royal Pavilion and Museums collections to fill the void of the original objects that were removed during the municipal period. So the work that I've been doing on the Saloon project has definitely been very unique. The normal path of my course for my job is very quick treatments, basically minimal intervention, like first aid treatments, and a lot of preventive work. The Saloon, on the other hand, being a very high-profile restoration project, permitted further treatment, so a greater degree of restoration where there's missing parts to objects, as well as the fundamental conservation work. So the Robert Jones cabinets, there were originally a suite of 6 objects. So there were 2 larger pier cabinets and 4 smaller pedestal cabinets. And the larger pier cabinets originally sat below the pier mirrors between the glazed windows, where there were originally much wider mirror plates, which were the same width as the cabinets. So the idea was that the mirror plate would follow down, and then the mirror at the back of the cabinet would then also, so it would appear that the mirror was complete, going from top to bottom. The smaller pedestal cabinets would sit in the apses, one on either side, and essentially these were just display cabinets, although they're richly adorned in really expensive materials. They're there to display the most expensive and the most ornate of the decoration, which was the blue porcelain with decorative ormolu that came from them, which you can see in the Nash views and in the Nash view cross-section. So in essence, they're just display cabinets, but when you look at them on their own, they're obviously quite overly ornamented in the sort of style that George IV was typical of. The individual components each had some challenges, but there was a larger challenge, which was the fact that the cabinets were all part of a suite, and that suite was going to be exhibited in this room where a lot of the surface is going to be reproduction and very vibrantly, not looking particularly historic in terms of not having a patina of age. Yet the cabinets themselves, I wanted to show the historic surfaces, which do have a patina of age. And likewise, the cabinets have had different treatments over the years. So tying up some surfaces that have been repainted in a different period, in a different material, that's going to be sitting next to another cabinet that's been painted in a different material. The thing I found I was most worried about was having everything tied together. So the objects individually tying up, so each of the different surfaces looking like a complete object that made sense. And then also the objects individually fitting in with a suite, and then that whole suite fitting in with the restored saloon. So as certain aspects of the cleaning were completed, I would then bring cabinets down into the saloon, adjust the blinds, and try to get the light levels as they were going to be during display, and see how the cabinets looked. Fortunately, because the light levels in the saloon are much lower than you get in a studio, it made me less concerned, because all of a sudden everything comes back together. But that was probably the most difficult thing, is making restoration surfaces that I didn't really want to strip off the cabinet to all look fairly similar. That was probably the most tricky thing. The carcasses of the cabinets are all similarly constructed. They're pretty much entirely made of mahogany. The carcass itself is decorated in an ivory-coloured paint, and we know it was ivory-coloured partly from the analysis that we carried out, but also from the accounts. Robert Jones, in his own accounts, described it as a polished ivory surface. Aside from the gilt wood, there's also the ormolu decoration, which is essentially gilding, but on a metal substrate. In order to gild that, it's a completely different process. In the 19th century and before, the process was a fairly dangerous exercise where the gold is mixed in with a hot mercury amalgam with the gold melted into it. And then that would have been brushed onto the copper alloy. With furniture such as this, where you've got composite objects, where you've got historic water gilding next to an aged paint surface and next to aged silver gilding, it would have been inappropriate really to chemically clean the ormolu back to a really bright surface, because it would have looked like it's just come out of the workshop. A lot of the colouring of the gold, which was done after the gilding, there was a lot of secrecy between each of the workshops as to how they would do it. And when you've got an ormolu surface that then has gone through 200 years of repeated restoration and treatments, it's very hard to unpick what it's supposed to originally look like, because if those ormolu objects have been chemically cleaned in the past, it would have stripped off all of those colours. If they were a coating, it would have been stripped off, and if it was a patinating colour, it would have been stripped off too. So you're left with just a gold surface, which looks great in itself, but when you then apply that to the cabinet with the rest of its other surfaces, it detracts from how the object can be read as a whole, because you'll end up with like one component which looks really bright and brand new next to other historic surfaces which look older and more tired. So it can mislead the viewer. As a conservator, you kind of have to, if you don't have the information, you have to assume that the surface may well be historically important. And so therefore my approach to the ormolu, rather than being chemically clean the surfaces, which is a much quicker treatment to get back to a very nice, vibrant, bright, clean gold surface, instead, in order to preserve any coatings and tarnish, like coloration of the gold that's there, the cleaning had to be done mechanically. So where there was black spots of corrosion that have developed over the years, these were removed mechanically by going around under a microscope with a scalpel. So I wanted to keep as many of the original surfaces that are showing visible, because a lot of the surfaces that are not only on this cabinet but in the pavilion are reproductions. So it seems really important to show, when you've got an original surface, to show it.